Hi friends, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today I'm so excited to be showing you Mooncat's latest collection called Welcome to Paradise. This is a massive 10-piece collection in a range of different shades and finishes, all inspired by this dystopian cyberpunk aesthetic. As usual, I will save more of my thoughts for the end after the several comparisons that I have. For now, let's get into the swatches. First up, we have Ego Stroker 9000, which is a hot pink metallic holographic lacquer, which is a new formula for Mooncat. As with typical holographic polishes, you're going to see most of the rainbow flare in direct sunlight, but in lower or indirect lighting is where you'd see the more metallic side of the shade come out. As you saw for the application, this was incredibly full coverage. It is super pigmented, even on the first coat alone, so I would say if you have shorter nails, you might be able to get away with just one coat, but I still did two even for my full hand swatch here, which is also shown with top coat in bright, indirect light. Unfortunately, I didn't have direct sunlight, so there's no hollow flare. And here in lower lighting, you can see that silvery pink shimmer that makes it just read as a true metallic almost. Next we have Nirvana Pro X, which is a multi-chrome flaky packed with color shifting silver to pink to green flakies. When I first saw the swatch of this one, it looked very full coverage and fully opaque, so I decided to apply this one on its own. And as you can see, the first coat is definitely kind of sparse, where you could layer this as a topper if you wanted. But again, I just wanted to build this up on its own, see how much coverage you get with it. The second coat was a little bit finicky just because of this particular flaky formula. You want to make sure that your base or your previous coat is fully dried down before applying your next one. Otherwise, you're just going to drag up the polish and it's going to be a little gunky. So while the second coat did add some extra flakies, I found that it was still pretty sparse. So I went in with a thicker third coat and was sort of dabbing around the flakies to cover up as much of my nail as possible. But there were still some bald spots, and here for my full hand swatch, I just did the two coats for consistency later for my collages. So I wouldn't say that this one builds up to be fully opaque if you're applying it on its own. It would probably look best if you sponge it on or if you just use it as a topper. That being said, I do think the flakies in this are incredibly shiny, so it can be distracting from your bare nail underneath, but that just is personal preference. The first magnetic we have is 404 Soul Not Found, which is a highly pigmented black base filled with a multi-chrome magnetic that shifts between teal, blue, and purple. While it definitely is very highly pigmented, I still think I would call this a little bit more of a jelly-leaning magnetic, which is probably most evident near the tip of my nail that you can see through a little bit. And because this has a black base, I found it to be fully opaque for me in just two coats. The formula was super smooth, just so buttery to apply. It just magnetized so easily. Obviously, the cat eye is always going to be super crisp after immediately swatching it, but there are some magnetics that just don't magnetize as easily. But I would say this one and the other magnetics in this collection really shine in the velvet effect. I feel like the magnetic shimmer in these is just so finely milled and densely packed. It just blew my mind seeing them velvetized. I was so mesmerized by them. They just look so plump and honestly like gels. I'm also a fan of the multi-chrome magnetic shimmer shift in here, going from that greenish teal to blue and purpley pink in more extreme lighting. The next magnetic we have is Port 6666, a multi-chrome magnetic lacquer shifting between magenta pink and purple that reveals a black navy base underneath. I was honestly pretty surprised to see this one had a navy blue sort of base. You can definitely see that on the first coat and also on the stem of the brush, but obviously because it is so incredibly dark, it just kind of reads as black in most lighting, especially once you build it up to full opacity in just two coats. Though as you'll see later in the comparison portion, once you do see it next to a true black, you can see a little bit of that difference in the base color. Formula-wise, this one performed just the same as as the last polish, which was so smooth and easy. It magnetized beautifully, and again, my favorite is the velvet effect in this one. I also just really love that this is a more purple to pink shifting multi-chrome. I could notice in very extreme angles, it does also have a little bit of an orange and gold color, though it was harder to sort of pick that up. So in a way, I feel like the multi-chrome didn't stand out as much as in Soul Not Found, at least when it came to those more extreme color shifts. Obviously, seeing it head on, it is still incredibly shifty, and again, hopefully you can tell with the cat eye effect that the base just kind of looks black. Then we have Meowtek Industries, which is a multi-chrome that shifts between shades of green and purple. I think this one is in a black base, though it doesn't really matter so much because it is incredibly packed with that multi-chrome shimmer. It just makes it so hard to see the base. This also had a super smooth and easy to work with formula. I would say a little bit thinner maybe compared to the magnetics at least, but still incredibly full coverage to the point that I got it fully opaque in just 2 coats, and I don't think you would need a third unless your nails were a lot longer. And yeah, I would say that this has a very accurate color description. Head on, I feel like you can see shades of emerald green, and as it shifts, it goes into teal and blue and purple, maybe with a little hint of pink in very extreme angles. It's just super shifty and so glowy. I can only imagine how glorious this would look in direct sunlight. Up next we have Cyborg Tears, which is a light blue-silver metallic holographic, so the same formula as Ego Stroker. I was really impressed to see that this one was just as pigmented and full coverage even on the first coat, despite being such a light color. I figured it would be a little bit sheer where you can see some of your bare nail underneath, but I personally didn't see that, though I wouldn't call it 100% opaque on the first coat. You probably could still get away with it just because of how pigmented and even coverage it is, but if you want that full opacity finished mani kind of look, I would just do a second coat for this one. Again, I'm so sorry I didn't have direct sunlight when doing my full hand swatches. It would have been so beautiful to see the holographic flare, but it still was really sparkly and pretty. I would say it definitely just reads more as a metallic shade, likely because of that icy blue sort of silver, but the base color is definitely really nice. It just gives me more winter vibes. Next we have the only thermal in the collection. This one is called Moral Decay, and this one has an interesting description. It's described as a dark green to teal thermal that transitions from a shade of dark green-black when cold, which is what you'd see here, to a bright teal when warm. So as I just said, I am running cold, so this is the cold state of the color, but I would not call this a dark green-black at all. I personally just see this as like a dark blue, more specifically a peacock blue, so you know, maybe there is like a teal undertone, but I just don't see green. But the warm state I could definitely see being described as teal, even if it is a little bit more on the blue side than like a true teal. That's just depending on how you describe and also see the color teal. I do also wish that the color transitions were a little bit more contrasty maybe, or at least I noticed that in brighter kind of indirect lighting it was a little hard to tell them apart, though you can see more of a distinct difference in lower lighting or under your desk lighting. Then we have Mutiny, which is a lime green magnetic that reveals a deep teal base when magnetized. Just like the other magnetics, this one had another super gorgeous, highly pigmented formula. It was very full coverage on the first coat, revealing a little bit of sheerness in some spots. So again, it does lean a little bit in that jelly kind of finish, but because it's just so pigmented and so dark, it builds up really beautifully in just 2 coats alone. And even though it does look incredibly dark here, I feel like this one doesn't exactly read as dark where it almost looks black, though I guess it could just depend on the lighting. In real life, I could definitely see more of that teal color, but I would say it's like a blackened teal base. It is just super gorgeous and the perfect base color to complement that lime green shimmer, which is actually kind of a duochrome as well. It's not described that way, but I did notice that it's a bright lime green head on, but in more extreme angles, it does shift to teal and blue. I actually had to reposition myself by the window to better catch that teal blue shift, so it is just super, super pretty. I just love this kind of color combination. It velvetized so beautifully, just looking so glassy to the point that it makes your nails look like jewels. I feel like a lot of other magnetics in the velvet effect kind of look flat or almost unmagnetized in lower lighting, so I really love that you can still see the effect here. We have one last metallic holo, and this one is called Nightmode, and it's just described as a blue purple. I would say that's definitely very accurate. Maybe this one reads a little bit more purple to me, but as you'll see later during the comparison portion, when it's paired with other purples, you can definitely see how it pulls a little bit blue, making it a very true blurple. Like the other metallic holos in this collection, this one had another super beautiful formula that was just so buttery smooth to apply, very highly pigmented and even coverage. And because this one is a bit of a darker color, I would say you could get away with it in one coat if you're in a pinch, but of course I would recommend doing 2 coats to make this fully opaque. It doesn't really add much in terms of more coverage, but it does intensify and deepen the color a little bit more. While I do like the color of this one, it again is just, you know, reading as a more metallic, wintry kind of shade to me. And rounding out the collection, we have Epilogue to Utopia, which is a highly pigmented black base with a multi-chrome magnetic pigment that shifts between indigo, blue, and purple. So this is the only other true black base magnetic, similar to 404 Soul Not Found, but again, that one had a much brighter tealy green sort of colored shimmer head on, while this one is that darker indigo color. But they do both have a more pinky purple color shift in more extreme lighting, so I can kind of see how some people would say that they're similar. If anything, I would say this one is more similar to Port 666 because it has that purpley pink magnetic shimmer against that navy blue base, so it's kind of like the reverse colors in a way. Either way, it's a very pretty color combination. Again, it magnetized so beautifully, especially in the velvet effect. I did also kind of have a hard time capturing the more extreme color shifts in this one, where I had to like reposition myself by the window. I don't think it makes that much of a difference, but I would say that the shades Mutiny and Soul Not Found just had the most glowy multi-chrome shimmer. And here is my full hand swatch collage of the Welcome to Paradise collection. Again, I'm wearing 2 coats of each polish with the cat eye on my pointer and pinkies and the velvet effect on my middle 2 fingers for all of the magnetics. While the color palette is pretty limited to greens, blues, and purples with some pops of pink in there, I definitely feel like it's a very blue heavy collection. Now getting into comparisons, we're starting with Ego Stroker, and I first wanted to pull out Space Oddity because I thought this was going to be a micro flaky kind of formula, but it's definitely not, and the color of Space Oddity is a bit more vibrant as well, so it's definitely much closer to Venus Flytrap, which is a linear holo and one of their dearly departed shades. Ego Stroker is obviously the replacement for Venus Flytrap. They are basically the same exact base color, but Ego Stroker has that pink shimmer. I thought Ego Stroker kind of looked like an unmagnetized magnetic polish, so first I pulled out ILNP's Be Mine, which is a raspberry red sort of shade, so there is like a pink undertone, but that's just way more red. If anything, I think it is a little bit closer to Holotaco's Love Spell, which is also a retired shade. That one does have a pinkish kind of shimmer, but there's a lot more depth to the Holotaco shade, even unmagnetized. The base is a little bit more red leaning, and there's also these hollow flakies. The closer ILNP shade to Ego Stroker, I think, is Showstopper. This is another kind of shimmery, metallic sort of formula, but again, I would say that one has a bit more depth than Ego Stroker, where the base is a little bit darker and stands out more from the shimmer. Next for Nirvana Pro X, I did want to quickly show this next to Jewel Beetle and Am I Everything You Fear. Even though those are obviously more of these shimmer formulas, not flakies, I just thought color-wise it was kind of somewhere in between these two. Next, I wanted to show Nirvana Pro next to Tectonic Shift since I saw a couple people on Reddit think these were kind of similar. I personally wouldn't say so. I think Tectonic Shift, even though it does have this micro flaky kind of finish, just reads more as like a shimmer kind of polish. The flakies are a lot smaller, not to mention the color scheme is totally different. If anything, Dragon Scales is the much closer shade where it is another multichrome flaky kind of polish, but that one is a lot more densely packed. For reference, both my nail and the swatch stick have 3 coats, but there's just noticeable bald spots on my nail. And while they are both multichromes, I think Dragon Scales is a bit more shifty. Next, for Soul Not Found, here it is next to ILNP's Deep Space, which I know is highly requested. This is another black-based magnetic with the shimmer shifting from teal to blue to purple. So they are basically dupes. The main difference, though, is that ILNP does have this additional hollow sparkle in the background. So it's going to be most noticeable with the cat eye effect, but again, they do have the same black bases and almost the same magnetic shimmer. If I'm being really nitpicky, I do think that the shimmer head on in ILNP is just like a smidge more green, but it does still shift to the same shades of teal and blue. It's just these very specific angles where you can see there's a little bit more green. I'm showing 2 coats of each here as well with the velvet effect, and I think I would say that this shimmer is a little bit more densely packed in Mooncat, but again, these are such small differences. Here's a quick bottle comparison next to a Most Destructive Melody, which is another kind of multi-chrome polish. That one's not magnetic. It does have a stronger blue color head on, and I think the base in that one is more purple, not black, but they kind of have a similar color shift going to purpley pink in extreme light. I'm sure you've all seen this comparison already, but here it is next to Millennia, at least my swatch stick of it, because I destashed it since it was so disappointingly sheer on me. This is 3 coats of Millennia, by the way, next to 2 coats of Soul Not Found, so hopefully you can see just how sheer that one was. It just looks more gray than black, but the shimmer is kind of the same color. I would say it just looks more intense in the new version. And here is Soul Not Found next to Mad Hatter, which was one of the Alice in Wonderland collab shades. It does have a black base and a multi-chrome shimmer, but the colors are a little bit different, and there's also flakies in Mad Hatter. I also saw some comments mentioning that this was going to be similar to Starrely's Hera. I unfortunately don't have this one, so I just have the photo of it. I would say it definitely looks really similar, but there is this one photo of Hera where you don't see any green or teal, but you do always see that in Mooncat. The Starrily I do have to compare, though, is Geomagnetic Storm Sights from their Northern Lights collection earlier this year. This one is a multi-chrome magnetic, but it does have this extra background shimmer, which kind of obscures the black base underneath, so I wouldn't call these dupes at all. Hera is definitely much closer, but the colors are kind of similar, staying in that teal to blue to purple family. Moving on to port 6666, I was immediately reminded of Mortals Be Warned, even though that one isn't a magnetic, it's just a multi-chrome shade, so I pulled that out along with Malevolent, which is a magnetic polish. I think the shade of purple shimmer is closest in Mortals Be Warned. It's like a little bit more blue leaning though, and it has a much stronger multi-chrome shift going to copper and even a pinky red in very extreme lights, while the shimmer in Malevolent is a little bit warmer toned, or maybe just like softer. It's not as saturated as port 6666, and it also has a similar color shift going to copper and gold in extreme lights. The main difference is the base of Malevolent is a true black compared to the navy blue, and it also has a scattered hollow, so they're not exact dupes, but I could see how port 6666 is the 2.0 version. The closest to a dupe that I have is ILNP's High Roller, which basically has the same exact multi-chrome shifting shimmer going from purple to pink to copper in extreme angles. But the main difference here is, again, ILNP has a true black base, while port 6666 is that navy blue. Though, again, I feel like it's just so incredibly dark, it's kind of hard to tell that apart. It's probably going to be easier to see the difference in direct sunlight. I think you can make out a little bit of the blue under direct lighting, but it's just such a small difference. And the other main difference too is that ILNP has those little hollow flakies. I think I would also say that port 6666 has a little bit more of a pinky color head on. It's still very purple, but it's just a bit warmer toned than ILNP. Moving on to Meowtek Industries, I was immediately reminded of Root of All Evil from the Pandora Unboxed collection. That one has a very similar greenish teal multi-chrome shimmer, but it's in a purple base. I feel like seeing them side by side in the bottle, they just look like they kind of could be dupes, but seeing them on the nail, there was such a stark difference. I first wanted to show them in one coat each, just so you can see how much more sheer Root of All Evil is. Like I mentioned, that one is also more of a purpley mulberry kind of base color, almost looking a little bit brown. So even after 2 coats, you still see some visible nail line, while Meowtek is fully opaque. And even though they have a similar green shimmer head on, in more extreme lightings, they shift to different colors. And lastly, here is Meowtek next to Soul Not Found, which, yes, they are basically the same exact multi-chrome shimmer, so it just depends on whether you want a magnetic or not. Moving on to Cyborg Tears, I first pulled out Death Star and Outlaw Country, both of which are more silvery gunmetal kind of shades. Death Star does have a linear hollow effect, while Outlaw Country is more of a true metallic, so Cyborg Tears is supposed to be the in-between or a combination of these two kind of finishes, and obviously it's a bit more blue leaning, but with a very, very strong, cool, silvery kind of undertone, so the blue really stands out the most, I think, when paired next to other silvers. So it also reminded me of Star Destroyer in that way, where it's supposed to be like an icy blue, but it just pulls very silver. Some other icy kind of blues that I have are ILNP's Aria and ILNP's Snowkissed. Aria is a true linear hollow, while Snowkissed is that sort of metallic, shimmery kind of formula. Aria is much more vibrant, almost like a brighter aqua sort of color, so I think Snowkissed is a bit closer color-wise. It's maybe a shade or two darker, and of course it has a totally different finish, so, you know, not exact dupes by any means, but kind of close vibe-wise. Moving on to Moral Decay, here is a quick bottle comparison next to Treachery in the blue, which is another thermal. The cold state, though, is this much more mid-toned, almost denim kind of blue, so definitely not a dupe. When it comes to a more peacock blue, I immediately thought of Olivab's Josler as well as Olivab's Raindrop. Neither of these are thermals. Josler is just a cream, while Raindrop is a little bit more of a crelly formula with a scattered hollow, but color-wise, I would say that Raindrop is actually really, really close to the cold state, at least, of Moral Decay. In some angles, though, Raindrop can look a little bit darker, but for the most part, I would call them dupes. Next, for Mutiny, I was immediately reminded of Drown My Demons, which is another teal kind of magnetic, as well as Serpents of Eden, which is just a green sort of multi-chrome. That one's not magnetic. In the bottle, though, I would say that Serpents of Eden is definitely the closest to Mutiny. I think I would go as far as saying that they do have the same exact shimmer, going from that bright lime green to teal in very extreme lighting. If you're lazy with your magnetics, I think you would end up duping yourself if you already have Serpents of Eden. Drown My Demons, on the other hand, is a little bit more different. It does have a brighter, true blue base compared to the teal in Mutiny. I'd say that Drown My Demons is a little bit more sheer as well, or it's just a less pigmented kind of base, and the shimmer color is also a little different, where it's more green in Drown My Demons. I think Mutiny has more of that bright, limey, yellow-green color. And here with the velvet effect, hopefully you can see just how finely milled and densely packed the shimmers are in these new magnetics. I did also want to show this next to Holo Taco's Wicked Potion, which is another green magnetic. It has a similar green kind of shimmer, at least at first glance, but Holo Taco has a blackened green base, so it's much darker than Mutiny. And I also wanted to pull out Starrely's Pluto from their Planets collection. That one does have a very similar teal base color, and almost the same exact shimmer as well. Maybe Pluto is a little bit more green leaning, but they are very, very close. And lastly, for Mutiny, I thought the closest ILNP magnetics I had were Frankie and Enchantment. Frankie is that limey green sort of shimmer color, but it's not as multichromatic or shifty as Mutiny, and the base is also a lot lighter, not teal, so Enchantment is definitely the closest one here, where it does have a teal base color and a very similar sort of shimmer, but I would say Enchantment is a little bit lighter, not to mention it's packed with hollow flakies. Then for Nightmode, I was immediately reminded of Anti-Fragile, which is the purple linear holo they retired earlier this year. So I'm assuming Nightmode is supposed to be the 2.0 version. I would say it's not that close, at least not as similar as the hot pinks from earlier. Nightmode is a little bit more blurple leaning, while Anti-Fragile is a true purple. And I was also kind of reminded of Ghost Ship, which is a magnetic polish, but leaving it unmagnetized makes it look like a shimmery metallic sort of shade. I think the closest shade I have to Nightmode is ILNP's Winter Dream. Looking at them side by side, I think they're reading as dupes on the camera, but in real life you can tell them apart, where Winter Dream is a little bit more blue leaning, so it's still in that blurple category, but just not as purple as Nightmode. It's also a shade or two lighter and obviously more silvery in the metallic shimmer finish. And lastly, for Epilogue to Utopia, I think the closest shade that I had to this was ILNP's Abracadabra. This is just a shimmer polish, it's not magnetic at all, but I think the indigo color of the shimmer is pretty close. It's just maybe a bit darker in ILNP, not as densely packed obviously, so not exact dupes by any means, but kind of close color wise. I saw somebody on Reddit request this comparison with KB Shimmer's Spectral Flare, which unfortunately I don't have, but here's a photo of it. I think KB Shimmer is a little bit more shifty, going to red in extreme angles, and it also has a multichrome flaky as well, but in certain angles I think it does look close to this Mooncat shade. But I think the closest is probably going to be ILNP's After Hours, which is another black base with a very similar multichrome shimmer. I think I would even say it's the exact same shimmer, going from indigo to pink. The main difference here though is ILNP has hollow flakies. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for Mooncat's Welcome to Paradise collection. As always, I would love to know your thoughts on this release because in general, I do really like it. I thought the formulas were fantastic. I was really appreciative of how highly pigmented these were, where most of them had incredible coverage on the first coat. They were all very easy to work with, maybe with the exception of Nirvana Pro X. I also really think the theme is super cool and definitely more in line with what I would expect from Mooncat, so it was just really nice to see that, especially after the previous two collections, which were the total 180 vibe-wise, being these lighter pastels. Obviously, I am a fan of those as well, so I just appreciate Mooncat giving us just a range no matter what your tastes are. The reason I'm a little meh on this collection and why I don't love it, I think comes down to the colors, where as you saw in the comparisons, it's pretty clear that this new pink and purple are the replacements for some of the dearly departed shades like Venus Flytrap and Anti-Fragile. And I can't help but think that it's kind of the same for some of these other shades, where they are just very close to existing Mooncat shades, but I feel like neither of these new shades really have that like wow factor for me. Granted, I know I didn't see them in direct sunlight, but being this new metallic holographic finish, you know, they're supposed to look really cool in the shade or like in lower lighting, but I feel like they didn't look that much better compared to a regular holo, so I don't know, maybe I'm just not a fan of this new finish, which is a shame to say because I did think those polishes, like objectively speaking, were great when it comes to the formula, the coverage, and the colors are nice. I think it's just something that, you know, doesn't wow me. Even for the other colors though, I can't help but feel like they are a little bit repetitive for what we already have in Mooncat's catalog. So I can't help but think that, you know, maybe we do already know what's going to be on the chopping block for the next round of dearly departed shades. you know, thinking of Millennia, Dragon Scales, maybe even Serpents of Eden or Root of All Evil. But if by some miracle those shades don't end up getting retired, I feel like they will just be a little too close to still have in the catalog. This might just be totally subjective, where I know that I don't really gravitate towards these like darker sort of shades. And, you know, I'm also forgiving of the fact that over time, as brands continue to release new shades and build out their catalogs, we are going to see some overlap in colors. But overall, I do really love the theme and think it's just like so well executed and perfectly curated. I do think the magnetics are easily the strongest part of this collection. That's not to say that I think the magnetics are worth the $18. Obviously, that is much more subjective. Like, while I do appreciate how beautifully they velvetized and just magnetized in general, just having this very gel-like effect, I feel like that alone isn't enough to justify the higher price point. Like, maybe if they had a little bit of a multi-chrome flaky added as well, but they are multi-chrome magnetics at least, so they are very color shifty. But in general, I do really like those finishes, and the rest of the finishes unfortunately fell a little flat for me, but I think they work nicely as a theme. I just don't think I love them all individually. But anyway, I really hope that you like this video, especially if you found my review or the comparisons helpful. I obviously don't have a ton of polishes similar to this in my collection, so hopefully the photos of some of them were helpful. But make sure to let me know any and all thoughts that you have down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!